He's not dead. You're killing him. The scientists freeze. The boy at the door holds a bundle of weeds. This is the moment everything changes. 11 of the world's most brilliant scientists stand defeated. A billionaire's only heir lies dying. The illness? No one can identify it. A pathogen that mutates faster than any treatment can target it. Then, a village boy appears at the hospital door, barefoot, covered in dust, carrying plants. They laugh at him, call security. But he's seen this before, in his goats, in his village, in children who lived because of an old woman's wisdom. At the moment modern medicine admits failure, he offers something they never considered. What he reveals will shatter their certainty, but what he asks for afterward, that will change how the entire world thinks about knowledge, education, and who deserves to be heard. If you're watching this right now, I need your help with something. My mother told me these stories wouldn't matter to anyone, that traditional wisdom is just old tales nobody cares about anymore. But I believe stories like Samuel's deserve to be heard. If this moves you at all, prove her wrong. Share this story. The goats were dying. The third one fell that morning, its legs folded like broken sticks. Samuel watched in horror. The animal's breathing came in sharp, cracked gasps, like wind whistling through dead wood. Dark patches spread across its hide, like spilled ink on cloth. Samuel was 12 years old, an orphan. He'd lost his parents to drought 3 years ago. These 5 goats, they were all that stood between him and starvation. He ran, barefoot through the red dust, toward Mama Zuri's hut. The old woman sat beneath the acacia tree, grinding something in her worn mortar. Her hands moved with practiced rhythm, 70 years of practice. She didn't look up when Samuel arrived, breathless, tears cutting tracks down his dusty face. Mama Zuri, the dying, all of 'em, the breathing, the patches, I don't know what to do. Her hands stopped. She looked up. Her clouded eyes saw more than Samuel's clear ones ever could. Show me. At the goat pen, Mama Zuri knelt beside the dying animals. She pressed her fingers against their throats, examined their eyes, smelled their breath. Then she nodded slowly. I've seen this before, long ago when I was younger than you. It took many animals before we understood. What is it? What do I do? Mama Zuri stood, her joints cracking like dry branches. Come, we don't have much time. She led him into the bush, moving fast for someone so old. She pointed to plants Samuel had passed 1,000 times, never noticing. A low shrub with silver leaves, a vine with tiny yellow flowers, a tree whose bark peeled in copper-colored strips. These 3, only these 3, picked before the sun reaches its highest point, never alone, always together. Samuel gathered them quickly, his hands shaking. Back at her hut, Mama Zuri showed him the preparation, crushing the leaves, stripping the bark in thin pieces, bruising the flowers until their oil released. She mixed them in rainwater, collected from the clay pot by her door. Not well water, never well water. The mixture turned cloudy, then amber. A sharp, clean smell cut through the heavy afternoon air. Give each goat 3 mouthfuls, no more, no less. Samuel ran back to his animals. The weakest one could barely lift its head. He cradled it, poured the mixture into its mouth, praying to ancestors he barely remembered. Then the next goat, then the next. By sunset, He treated all 5, every drop used. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the pen, listening to their labored breathing, waiting for 'em to stop. But as the moon rose high and white, something changed. The cracked whistling sound began to ease. One goat lifted its head, then another. By dawn, all 5 were standing, weak but alive. The dark patches had begun to fade. Samuel wept with relief. But 3 days later, something worse happened. Little Amara from the neighboring compound started showing the same symptoms. Her breathing cracked like breaking wood. Dark patches bloomed on her arms. Her mother's wails echoed through the village. Then 2 more children fell ill. Panic spread faster than the sickness itself. But here's what the scientists would never understand. Mama Zuri didn't panic. She'd been waiting for this. She moved through the village like a general. Fetch the silver leaf plant. Get rainwater, only rainwater. Bring me the copper bark tree strips. Samuel helped to prepare batch after batch. They worked through the night, treating each sick child with the same careful precision. One by one, the children recovered. The village whispered about Mama Zuri's magic, but Samuel knew better. This wasn't magic. This was knowledge, hard-won and carefully preserved. Then a trader arrived from the capital. His news made Mama Zuri's face go pale. A mysterious disease was killing people in the city. The symptoms he described, identical. The cracked breathing, the dark patches, the dawn fever spikes. 11 scientists from around the world had been called in. Nothing was working. A billionaire's son lay dying. The entire nation held its breath. Mama Zuri called Samuel to her hut that evening. Her face was grave in the firelight. She pressed a carefully wrapped bundle into his hands. Herbs tied with dried vine, picked that morning, prepared exactly as she'd taught him. You must take these to the capital, to the hospital where the rich boy is dying. Samuel's stomach dropped. Mama, I can't. The city? I've never been there. They won't listen to someone like me. You are the one who saved the goats. You are the one who helped save our children. Her grip on his hands tightened. The ancestors speak through the land, Samuel. The city has forgotten how to listen. You must remind them. But the scientists, the doctors, they know so much more than... Do they? Mama Zuri's clouded eyes pierced right through him. Knowledge lives in many places, child. Sometimes the wisest men are the ones who know they don't know everything. She pressed the bundle harder into his hands. Tell them it's not new. Tell them we've survived it for generations. Tell them the land remembers, even when people forget. Samuel left before dawn, walking the red dirt path, away from the only world he'd ever known. The bundle of herbs hung heavy in his cloth bag. 3 days of walking stretched ahead, through bush, along the main road, into a city of towers and cars, a city of people who would see a barefoot village boy and think nothing, know nothing, believe nothing he had to say. Behind him, Mama Zuri watched until he disappeared into the morning mist. She whispered a prayer to ancestors long gone, asking them to give the boy courage, because what waited for him wasn't just locked doors, not just suspicious guards. It was something far more dangerous, the certainty of the educated, the arrogance of expertise, the stone wall of people who trust only what they can measure, test, and control. Samuel carried something far older, far deeper. But would anyone listen before it was too late? The machines beeped in perfect rhythm, counting down the moments Tony Pemberton had left with his son. 12 days. 12 days of watching Thomas fade behind sterile glass, his small body connected to tubes and wires, measuring everything except hope. Tony pressed his palm against the observation window. His reflection stared back. A man who'd built an empire from nothing, who commanded boardrooms, who bent markets to his will. None of it mattered now. All his money, all his power couldn't buy his son one more breath. Inside the isolation ward, 11 scientists huddled around monitors. Numbers that made no sense. Dr. Helena Moss, the lead virologist from Geneva, ran her fingers through her gray hair for the 100th time that hour. Behind her, specialists from Johns Hopkins, Oxford, and Tokyo argued, hushed, desperate voices. The mutation rate is impossible, a young immunologist said, his voice cracking. Every 6 hours, it's a completely different pathogen. By the time we develop a targeted treatment, it's already evolved past it. Dr. Moss pulled up the latest scan. Thomas's organs were shutting down, one by one, following a pattern that defied every model they had. Liver function at 30%, kidney markers dropping, the dark patches spreading across his skin, like a map of his body's surrender. We've tried 16 different antiviral combinations, she said, her voice hollow with exhaustion. Experimental gene therapy, synthetic antibodies. We even attempted a treatment that hasn't been approved anywhere in the world. She paused. Nothing even slows it down. Tony couldn't hear their conversation through the glass, but he could read defeat in their body language. The slumped shoulders, the averted eyes, the way they kept checking their watches, as if time itself had become their enemy. A younger specialist approached Dr. Moss, tablet in hand. The pathogen's genetic sequence, it doesn't match anything in our databases. It's like it's been evolving in complete isolation somewhere, adapting to pressures we don't understand. That's scientifically impossible, someone muttered. So is watching it happen, Dr. Moss shot back. Thomas stirred behind the glass, his breathing shallow and cracked, a sound like wind through broken branches. The dark patches had spread to his neck, his cheeks. His fever spiked at dawn and dusk with mechanical precision. Nothing they did changed the pattern. Tony's phone buzzed, another message from his wife. She'd collapsed yesterday, sedated in a room 2 floors down. He couldn't read it, couldn't face another question he had no answer for. Dr. Moss stepped out of the isolation ward, stripping off her protective gear. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling slightly. Tony knew what was coming before she opened her mouth. "Mr. Pemberton, I need to be honest with you." She couldn't meet his gaze. "We've exhausted every known medical intervention, every protocol, every experimental treatment, every theoretical approach we could justify trying." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. We're out of options." The words hit Tony like physical blows. "How long?" "Hours, maybe less. His organs are—" She stopped, unable to finish. Tony turned back to the window. His son lay dying. 11 of the world's brightest minds stood helpless. Machines worth millions documented every moment of his death with perfect precision, but couldn't stop it. "There has to be something," Tony said, his voice breaking. "Some treatment you haven't tried, some specialist you haven't called." "We've consulted with every expert on the planet," Dr. Moss said gently. Behind them, footsteps echoed in the corridor. A security guard's voice, sharp with irritation. "I said you can't come up here. This is a restricted floor."
Please, I need to. The boy who's sick. I know how to help him. Sure you do, kid. Come on, back downstairs. No, listen. The breathing. Does it sound like cracking wood? The patches on his skin, are they dark like old bruises? Does the fever come at dawn? Tony spun around. Through the corridor entrance, he saw a security guard gripping the arm of a village boy, maybe 12 years old, barefoot, covered in red dust from the road. The boy clutched a cloth bag to his chest, his eyes wide and desperate. Dr. Moss stiffened. How does he know those symptoms? We haven't released any medical details to the public. The guard pulled the boy backward. Sorry for the disturbance, Mr. Pemberton. I'll have him removed. Wait. Tony moved toward them. Something stirring in his chest. Not hope. He'd buried hope days ago. But curiosity. Desperation. How do you know about my son's symptoms? The boy looked up at him, and Tony saw something he hadn't seen in any of the scientists' faces. Certainty. Not arrogance, not confidence. Just the quiet certainty of someone who'd seen this before. Because, Samuel said, his voice steady despite his trembling hands, in my village, the goats had this sickness. Then the children, and we saved them. Dr. Moss laughed, a harsh, broken sound. The goats? You think a billionaire's son has the same illness as your farm animals? But Tony didn't laugh. He stared at the boy's bag, at the way he held it like it contained something precious. What's in there? Samuel opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were bundles of dried plants. The smell that rose was sharp and clean, nothing like the antiseptic stench of the hospital.
"Medicine," Samuel said simply. "The medicine that saved them. Mama Zuri said the city has forgotten to listen, but I have to try, before it's too late." The security guard tightened his grip. "Mr. Pemberton, I'll escort him out." An alarm shrieked through the corridor. Inside the isolation ward, Thomas's monitors flashed red. Scientists rushed to his bedside. Dr. Moss ran back inside, shouting orders. Tony stood frozen between two impossible choices. Trust 11 world-renowned scientists who'd already failed, or listen to a barefoot village boy with a bag of weeds. His son's life hung in the balance, and time had just run out. The security guard's grip on Samuel's arm tightened like a vice. "I said you need to leave, now." Samuel's feet scraped against the polished hospital floor. He was dragged backwards. Everything here was white and gleaming, so different from the red dust and rough wood of home. The bright lights hurt his eyes. The smell of chemicals made his throat burn. But he couldn't leave. Not yet. "Please, just listen." Samuel twisted, trying to break free. His cloth bag swung wildly. Several herb bundles tumbled out, scattering across the pristine floor. "Now look what you've done." The guard shoved him against the wall. "Bringing your trash into a medical facility? Do you have any idea how many rules you're breaking?" A nurse emerged from a nearby room, her face sharp with annoyance. She looked at Samuel, his dusty clothes, his bare feet leaving faint red prints on the white tiles, his sun-darkened skin marking him as someone from far outside the city. Her lip curled in disgust. "What is this? We have a critically ill patient on this floor. This area is sterile. Get this vagrant out of here before he contaminates everything."
"I'm trying to help." Samuel's voice cracked with desperation. He pointed toward the isolation ward where Thomas lay dying. "The boy in there, his sickness, I know what it is. The breathing that sounds like cracking wood, the dark patches like spilled ink, the fever that spikes when the sun rises and sets." The nurse froze mid-step. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "How do you know those symptoms? Those are confidential medical details. We haven't released any information to the public." The security guard's hand moved to his radio. "You think this is a game, kid? How long have you been following this family? Who sent you?" "No one sent me. Mama Zuri, she—" "Mama who?" The nurse stepped closer, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Listen to me very carefully. The Pemberton family is going through hell right now. If you're some kind of scam artist trying to exploit their grief, or worse, if you're with the press trying to get insider information—" "I'm not. I walked 3 days to get here. In my village, we had this same sickness. The goats first, then the children. We saved them with what? Grass?" The guard laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "The world's top scientists can't save that boy, but you think your village weeds will?" Another security officer arrived, drawn by the commotion. He picked up one of Samuel's fallen herb bundles, examining it with suspicion. "What is this stuff? Some kind of drug?" "It's medicine," Samuel said, but even to his own ears it sounded weak, unconvincing. "Medicine?" The nurse snatched the bundle from the guard's hand. "These could be poisonous. For all we know, you're trying to finish what the disease started. Maybe you're here to make sure that child dies." The accusation hit Samuel like a physical blow. "What? No, I would never."
"Then explain how you know confidential medical information," the first guard demanded. "Explain why you showed up here right now with mysterious plants claiming you can cure something that has 11 international experts stumped." Samuel's mind raced. How could he explain Mama Zuri's wisdom to people who looked at her herbs and saw only weeds? How could he make them understand that knowledge lived in places they'd never thought to look? "The land remembers," he said quietly, the words Mama Zuri had given him. "Even when people forget. This sickness, it's not new. It's been in our region for generations. We've learned to—" "Oh, now he's talking about the land remembering." The nurse rolled her eyes. "Wonderful. Witchcraft. That's exactly what we need right now." "I'm not a witch," Samuel's voice rose, echoing down the corridor. "I'm not a thief. I'm not a spy. I'm just trying to help before that boy dies the way our goats would have died if Mama Zuri hadn't—" "Enough." The guard yanked Samuel's bag away, dumping its contents onto the floor. More herb bundles fell out, along with a small clay container. The clay container rolled, heading toward the edge of the corridor, toward a drainage grate. Samuel's heart stopped. "No, don't let it—" A guard's boot stopped it, just in time. He picked it up, unscrewed the lid, sniffed the contents. He immediately jerked back. "This smells like chemicals. We need to test this. He could be carrying biological agents." Samuel's hands trembled. If that water spilled, if it touched the hospital floor, the remedy would be ruined forever. Rainwater couldn't be replaced with anything else. He'd have nothing.
The guards pawed through everything, examining each item with suspicion. A piece of dried bread wrapped in cloth, a worn photo of his parents, the only photo he owned. "Rainwater?" The nurse's voice dripped with condescension. "You walked 3 days carrying rainwater? Do you think we're idiots?" Footsteps approached from down the corridor, expensive shoes on polished tile. Tony Pemberton appeared, his face haggard with grief and exhaustion. He'd been walking, trying to escape the sight of his dying son, trying to find air in a building that suddenly felt like a tomb. He stopped when he saw the commotion. Another problem.
Another distraction. His jaw tightened. "What's going on here?" The nurse straightened immediately, her voice turning professional. "Mr. Pemberton, I apologize for the disturbance. This individual somehow obtained private medical information about your son and is attempting to gain access to the isolation ward with suspicious substances. We're handling it." Tony looked at Samuel, really looked at him for the first time. He saw a child, probably not much older than Thomas, trembling but holding his ground, scared but not backing down. "Is that true?" Tony asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "You're trying to get to my son?" Samuel met his eyes. Despite everything, the gods, the accusations, the humiliation of his belongings scattered across the floor like garbage, his voice was steady. "Yes, sir, because I can help him. I know you don't believe me. I know I look like nothing to you, but I've seen this sickness before. I've seen children survive it, and if you don't let me try, he's gonna die. Today, maybe in the next hour." The nurse started to object, but Tony raised his hand. Something in the boy's eyes gave him pause. Not cunning, not desperation, just a terrible, certain knowledge.
"Security," Tony said slowly. "Take him to an empty room. Don't let him leave, but don't hurt him." He looked at Samuel one more time. "We're going to find out exactly who you are and how you know what you know. And if you're lying, if this is some sick attempt to exploit my family's tragedy." He didn't finish the threat. He didn't need to. Samuel was led away, his herbs confiscated, his hope crumbling. Behind him, an alarm began to wail from Thomas's room, the same alarm that had been sounding with increasing frequency all morning, the alarm that meant time was running out faster than anyone wanted to admit. And Samuel, locked in a small holding room 3 corridors away, could do nothing but pray that someone would listen before it was too late. The alarm screamed through the corridor like a dying animal. Samuel's head snapped up from where he sat in the small holding room, his wrists still red from the security guard's grip. That sound, he knew that sound. In his village, when little Amara had gotten worse before the herbs finally worked, her mother had made a sound exactly like that. A sound of time running out. He lunged for the door, locked. Through the small window, he could see people running. Nurses, doctors, all converging on the isolation ward where Thomas lay dying. "No, no, no!" Samuel's hands pressed against the glass. He could see Dr. Moss's face, pale and stricken, running into the room. Could see Tony Pemberton standing frozen in the hallway, his body rigid with a terror that transcended wealth and power. The guard who'd been stationed outside Samuel's door abandoned his post, rushing toward the emergency. Samuel didn't hesitate. He grabbed the door handle, yanked it hard. The poorly latched lock gave way. He ran. His bare feet slapped against the cold tiles. A nurse shouted at him to stop. He didn't. He couldn't. Mama Zura's voice echoed in his head. The ancestors speak through the land. The city has forgotten how to listen. He burst into the corridor outside the isolation ward. Through the glass, he could see Thomas. The boy's skin had gone gray, the dark patches spreading like storm clouds. The machines around him flashed red, numbers dropping with terrifying speed.
Inside the room, the 11 scientists worked with frantic precision. IV lines adjusted, medications pushed, paddles charged. But Samuel could see it in their movements, the desperation of people who knew they were losing. "His breathing!" Samuel shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. "Does it sound like cracked wood, like wind through broken branches?" Several heads turned toward him. Security was already moving to grab him, but Samuel kept shouting, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "The dark patches, are they like old bruises, like spilled ink? Do they start at the throat and spread outward? The fever, does it spike exactly at dawn and at sunset, like clockwork?" Dr. Moss stepped out of the isolation ward, her face white. "How do you know those details? Those are unpublished clinical observations. We haven't shared those patterns with anyone outside this team." "Because I've seen it," Samuel struggled against the guard's grip. "In my village, the goats had this first, then the children. The fever comes with the sun because the pathogen is sensitive to temperature changes. The breathing sounds like that because the inflammation follows a specific pattern. The patches spread from the throat because that's where it enters the body first."
Tony Pemberton pushed through the gathered staff. His eyes were wild, red-rimmed from days without sleep. "You said you've seen children survive this?" "Yes, in my village, 5 children got sick. We treated them with—" "Mr. Pemberton, please." Dr. Moss stepped between them, her voice strained but firm. "You cannot seriously be considering this. We have 11 specialists here, decades of combined experience, millions of dollars in equipment, and my son is still dying." Tony's roar silenced the entire corridor. 12 days of your expertise, your equipment, your protocols, and he's worse. Every treatment you've tried has failed. "We're doing everything medically possible," a younger scientist began. "Then it's not enough." Tony's voice broke. He turned back to Samuel, and for the first time since arriving at the hospital, the boy saw something other than suspicion in an adult's eyes. He saw desperation. "What do you need?" "Tony, this is insanity." Dr. Moss's professional composure was cracking. "You're going to let superstition kill your son? These are plants from some village. We don't know what's in them, how they interact with the medications he's already on, what side effects. Your science already has killed him." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Tony's hands were shaking. "Look at him. Look at my son. He has minutes, maybe less. You just told me there's nothing left to try." "There are procedures, protocols," another scientist protested. "Protocols for what? For documenting his death?" Tony's laugh was bitter, broken. "I've paid for the best minds in the world. I've funded research labs, bought experimental treatments that aren't even legal, and my son is still dying. Maybe," his voice dropped to barely a whisper, "maybe the answer isn't expensive." A monitor alarm pitched higher. Through the glass, Thomas convulsed once, his small body arching against the restraints. "Sir, we need to make a decision now," a nurse said urgently. Dr. Moss grabbed Tony's arm. "If you do this, if you let him administer unverified substances, you could be charged with child endangerment. The medical board will—" "Let them try me." Tony's voice was steel, wrapped in grief. "Bring him in. Bring his herbs. Let him try." The corridor erupted in protest. Scientists talked over each other, their voices rising in a cacophony of objection and outrage. "This violates every ethical standard. We'll all lose our licenses. You're letting desperation cloud your judgment. He's a child with plants. This is medieval medicine." Tony turned to face them all. Something in his expression made the protests die in their throats. "You're right.
He's a child who walked 3 days to get here, who somehow knows clinical details we've kept confidential, who claims he's seen patients survive this, when you, he pointed at each scientist in turn, haven't seen a single recovery, not one. He looked at Samuel, really looked at him. You said children survived in your village. Samuel nodded, his throat tight. All 5. We almost lost one, a little girl named Amara, but the herbs worked. They worked, sir. Another alarm joined the first, a harmony of crisis. A nurse burst from the isolation ward. Dr. Moss, his oxygen saturation is dropping below 60%. We're losing him. Tony made his choice. Bring the boy in, now.
Security hesitated, looking at Dr. Moss. The virologist's face had gone hard, professional mask firmly in place. Fine, but when this fails, and it will fail, I want it on record that I advised against this course of action. Noted, Tony said flatly. Now move. Samuel was ushered forward, his confiscated herb bundles thrust back into his hands. As he approached the isolation ward door, his legs almost gave out. Behind him, 11 of the world's most brilliant scientists watched, with expressions ranging from disgust to morbid curiosity. Ahead of him, beyond the glass, an 8-year-old boy lay dying, his body shutting down system by system. And in Samuel's trembling hands, wrapped in cloth and dried vine, were plants that had saved lives in a village the world had forgotten. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss. The smell of antiseptic and fear hit him like a wall. Samuel stepped inside, knowing that in the next few minutes he would either save a life or become the boy who killed a billionaire's son. There was no middle ground left. The sterile air burned Samuel's lungs. Everything was white. White sheets, white machines that beeped with cold precision. In the center, surrounded by tubes and wires, Thomas lay motionless. His skin had taken on a grayish hue. Samuel recognized it immediately. He'd seen it on the weakest goat, the one that had almost died. 11 pairs of eyes tracked his every movement. The scientists had arranged themselves like a tribunal around the room's perimeter, arms crossed, faces set in expressions ranging from contempt to morbid curiosity.
Samuel's hand shook as he unwrapped his herb bundles. On a steel tray a nurse had reluctantly provided. The dried plants looked so small, so insignificant against the backdrop of millions of dollars in medical equipment. "Explain what you're doing," Dr. Moss said, her voice clipped and clinical. "Every step, we're documenting this." Samuel swallowed hard. "In our village, 5 years ago, the goats got this sickness. Many died before Mama Zuri, she's our elder, before she found the remedy." He separated the 3 different plants with careful precision. It's not one plant, it has to be all 3, prepared in a specific way. A younger scientist snorted. Of course it does. Magic always has rules." "It's not magic," Samuel said quietly, his fingers working to strip the copper-colored bark into thin pieces. It's like cooking. If you don't use the right ingredients in the right order, it doesn't work." "Pathogens don't care about your cooking metaphors," another scientist muttered. Samuel continued, crushing the silver leaves in the mortar a nurse had fetched from the hospital kitchen. The familiar motion calmed his nerves slightly. "Mama Zuri says these plants together create something new. Alone they do nothing, but combined they... He struggled for words the scientists might understand. "They change how the sickness behaves." Dr. Moss leaned forward. watching his hands. And the preparation time matters. You mentioned sunset. Yes, the plants are most potent when picked before the sun reaches its peak and prepared as it sets. Something about the temperature change, the way the oils release. He stopped, seeing skepticism harden on their faces. I don't know the science, I just know it works.
Superstitious nonsense, a German immunologist said flatly. Molecular compounds don't care what time of day it is. But Samuel noticed Dr. Moss hadn't looked away. Her eyes tracked his movements with the intensity of someone seeing something unexpected. He bruised the tiny yellow flowers until their oil began to seep out, then combined all three components in the mortar. Now the water, it has to be rainwater. Mama Zuri says well water or city water changes the mixture. Because your ancestors' spirits prefer rain, the sarcasm dripped from a British virologist's voice. Because rainwater has different minerals, Samuel said simply, different purity. He looked up at the nurses. Do you have distilled water? That's the closest to rain. A nurse glanced at Dr. Moss, who nodded curtly. Purified water was brought. Samuel added it slowly, watching the mixture turn from cloudy to amber, exactly as it should. The sharp, clean smell cut through the antiseptic stench of the room. Thomas's monitors beeped faster. An alarm chirped. Oxygen saturation dropping, a nurse announced. 58%. We're out of time, Tony said from the doorway, his voice raw. Samuel lifted the mortar with shaking hands. I need to give him 3 mouthfuls, through the feeding tube, slowly. Absolutely not, Dr. Moss stepped forward. We don't know the chemical composition of that mixture. It could interact catastrophically with the medications already in his system. It could trigger an allergic reaction, respiratory failure, cardiac arrest. He's already dying, Tony interrupted, his voice breaking. What's the worst that could happen?
He could die in agony instead of peacefully, Dr. Moss shot back. Mr. Pemberton, I know you're desperate, but this is reckless endangerment. Do it, Tony said, looking at Samuel. Give him the medicine. Samuel approached Thomas's bedside. His hands trembled so violently he nearly spilled the mixture. A nurse showed him how to access the feeding tube, her face carefully neutral. 3 mouthfuls, Samuel whispered, more to himself than anyone else. No more, no less. He administered the first dose. The amber liquid disappeared down the tube. The scientists watched in silence, broken only by the relentless beeping of monitors, counting down Thomas's remaining moments. 1 minute, someone announced. Samuel gave the second dose. Thomas didn't stir. The machines showed no change, the same declining numbers, the same failing systems. 2 minutes. The third and final dose. Samuel stepped back, the empty mortar still clutched in his hands. He found himself praying to ancestors he barely knew, to Mama Zuri's wisdom, to anything that might be listening. 3 minutes, no change. The German scientist's voice carried vindication. Oxygen saturation continuing to drop, 55% now. 4 minutes. Dr. Moss's expression was carefully controlled, but Samuel could see it underneath. Pity mixed with something darker. Triumph, maybe. The satisfaction of being proven right.
See, the British virologist said softly. Primitive ignorance dressed up as folk medicine. This is exactly why we have medical schools, peer review, clinical trials. 5 minutes, still no... Wait. The nurse, monitoring Thomas's vitals, leaned closer to the screen. Wait, that can't be right.
Every head turned toward the monitors. The oxygen saturation number had stopped falling. For 3 seconds, it held steady at 54%. Then, impossibly, it ticked up. 55, 56. That's equipment error, someone said quickly. Recalibrate. Heart rate stabilizing, another nurse interrupted, her voice tight with disbelief. Respiratory rate improving, the inflammation markers. Dr. Moss, look at the inflammation markers. Dr. Moss pushed forward, staring at the screen. The numbers that had been climbing relentlessly for 12 days were dropping, slowly at first, then faster. "This isn't possible," she whispered. Thomas's breathing changed. The cracked, broken sound began to smooth out. The grayish tint to his skin started to fade, color returning in faint pink patches. Oxygen saturation 62%, 65, 68. The nurse's voice rose with each number. Heart rate normalizing, blood pressure stabilizing. Samuel watched 11 faces transform in real time. Contempt melted into confusion, confusion sharpened into shock, shock deepened into something that looked like fear. The fear of having every certainty shattered. The German immunologist grabbed a tablet, pulling up the pathogen analysis. The mutation rate, it's slowing. How is it slowing? The viral load is dropping, another scientist said, her voice hollow. 20% decrease in 6 minutes. That's impossible without targeted antivirals. Thomas's eyes flooded, his fingers twitched. A small sound escaped his throat, not pain, but something closer to relief. Tony made a sound between a sob and a laugh. He moved toward his son, but Dr. Moss held up a hand. "Wait, we need to monitor for adverse reactions, sudden changes." "Oxygen saturation 75% and climbing," the nurse announced. "All vitals improving steadily." Thomas's eyes opened fully. He looked around the room with confusion, his gaze finally landing on his father. "Dad!" His voice was barely a whisper, cracked from disuse. "What happened? Where am I?" Tony's legs gave out. He collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaken with sobs he'd held back for 12 days. The isolation ward descended into stunned silence. The only sounds were Thomas's strengthening breaths, the steady beeping of normalizing monitors, and Tony Pemberton weeping with relief. Samuel stood in the corner, the empty mortar still in his hands, watching the boy he'd saved begin to sit up. Dr. Moss turned slowly to face him. Her expression was unreadable. Shock, humiliation, and something else, something that looked almost like wonder. "How?" she whispered. "How did you know?" But before Samuel could answer, Thomas spoke again, his voice growing stronger. "I'm thirsty and hungry, really hungry." A nurse laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "That's the best sign we've had in days." The scientists began talking all at once, demanding to analyze the herbs, to understand the mechanism, to explain what had just happened in terms that fit their models and theories. But Samuel's attention was caught by something else. Through the isolation ward's window, he could see into the corridor, where other patients' rooms lined the walls. And in 3 of those rooms, he could see children lying in beds, connected to similar machines, surrounded by similar desperation. Children with the same grayish skin tone, the same labored breathing, the same dark patches spreading. His heart dropped into his stomach. "There are more," he said, his voice cutting through the scientist's excited chatter.
There are more children with this sickness here, right now, in this hospital. Every head turned toward the window, toward the 3 other rooms where the same mysterious illness was stealing young lives. Dr. Moss's face went pale. The outbreak started 3 weeks ago. We've had 7 cases total. 4 died before we could... She stopped, unable to finish. Samuel looked down at his empty mortar, then at the remaining herbs in his cloth bundle. He'd brought enough for 1 treatment, maybe 2 if he stretched it. Not enough for 3 more dying children. Not nearly enough.
The sun rose over the hospital 3 times before Thomas could walk without assistance. With each hour, his recovery defied every medical prediction. The dark patches faded to faint shadows. His breathing returned to the easy rhythm of childhood. The mysterious pathogen that had baffled the world's brightest minds retreated under the steady pressure of 3 humble plants combined by ancient wisdom. But the other 3 children weren't as fortunate. Samuel had stretched his remaining herbs as far as they would go, preparing weaker doses, rationing every leaf and strip of bark. 2 children stabilized. The third, a 6-year-old girl who'd been sick the longest, responded too slowly. By the time Tony's private jet returned from Samuel's village with Mama Zuri and fresh supplies, they'd lost her. Samuel sat outside her room long after the machine stopped beeping, his head in his hands. Mama Zuri found him there, placed her weathered hand on his shoulder, and said nothing. Some silences held more truth than words. In the laboratory, 3 floors below, the scientists worked with a fervor that bordered on obsession. Dr. Moss had barely slept in 5 days, running analysis after analysis on Samuel's herbs. The results left her entire team shaken. The compounds don't just attack the pathogen, she explained to Tony during an emergency briefing, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. They inhibit its mutation mechanism. It's like they're speaking the pathogen's language, telling it to stop changing. She pulled up molecular diagrams that meant nothing to Samuel, but everything to the scientists gathered around.
These plants have been evolving alongside this illness for potentially centuries. They've developed a biological response we never thought to look for because... She stopped, the admission catching in her throat. Because they don't exist in your databases, Samuel finished quietly. Because nobody thought village plants were worth studying. The silence that followed was damning. Tony cleared his throat. Dr. Moss, what's your recommendation going forward? We need these plants. We need to understand them, synthesize the compounds, run proper trials. She caught herself, seeing Samuel's expression harden. With permission, with collaboration, with respect. That afternoon, Tony called Samuel to his son's room. Thomas sat propped up in bed, color fully returned to his cheeks, eating his 3rd meal of the day. When he saw Samuel, he smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from the boy in weeks. Dad says you saved my life, Thomas said simply. Samuel didn't know how to respond to that. In his village, saving lives was what you did. You didn't expect parades for it. Tony stood by the window, looking out at the city sprawling below. When he turned, his eyes were red-rimmed but clear. He held out an envelope, thick with what could only be money. I know money can't repay what you've done, Tony said, but please take this for your village, for yourself, for... No. Samuel's voice was firm. Tony blinked in surprise. No? I don't want your money. Samuel stood, meeting the billionaire's gaze directly.
Money won't save the next child who gets sick when the plants are gone because nobody knows how to grow 'em right. Money won't preserve Mama Zuri's knowledge when she dies and no one has learned from her. His voice grew stronger. Money won't stop scientists from coming to my village, taking our plants and turning them into pills they sell back to us at prices we can't afford. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Tony's face flushed, but he didn't look away. "Then what do you want?" he asked quietly. Samuel thought of the 3-day walk to get here, thought of the children in his village who couldn't read, who would never see a doctor, who lived and died in a world the city pretended didn't exist, thought of Mama Zuri, teaching him plant medicine by firelight, her knowledge precious and fragile and unwritten. "I want you to listen," Samuel said, "to people like Mama Zuri before they're gone and their knowledge dies with them. I want my village to have clean water and a school, but a real school, one that teaches reading and mathematics and science, yes, but also plant medicine, also the old ways, also the things the city thinks don't matter." He pointed at the scientists gathered in the hallway, watching through the window. "I want them to come to our villages, not to take, but to learn, to sit with our elders, to understand why the sunset matters, why rainwater is different, why some knowledge can't be written in your databases because it lives in the land itself." Dr. Moss stepped into the room, her face unreadable. "You're asking us to treat traditional knowledge as equal to modern science." "No," Samuel corrected. "I'm asking you to stop thinking they're opposites. Your science couldn't save Thomas. My village's plants couldn't have saved him without your feeding tubes and monitors to keep him alive long enough for the remedy to work. We need both. But you," he looked at each scientist in turn, "you need to stop thinking your way is the only way."
The German immunologist spoke up, his voice missing its earlier arrogance. "You're right. We were wrong, catastrophically wrong." He looked at his colleagues. "We've been operating under the assumption that indigenous medicine is primitive, inferior, when the truth is we've been ignoring a vast library of biological knowledge simply because it wasn't written in academic journals." "So what do we do?" Tony asked. "How do we fix this?" Over the next 3 hours, plans took shape. Not solutions imposed from above, but collaborations built on mutual respect. The scientists would partner with Mama Zuri and other village elders, documenting traditional remedies with their permission, understanding the context and wisdom behind each preparation. They would test the plants respectfully, share their findings freely, and ensure villages benefited from any medical advances that resulted. Tony committed resources, not as charity, but as investment. Clean water systems, schools that bridged traditional and modern knowledge, research facilities built in rural areas, not just cities, training programs where village healers and university scientists learned from each other. But no patents, Samuel insisted. The plants belong to the land. The knowledge belongs to everyone. The British virologist looked pained. "That will make pharmaceutical development difficult." "Then be difficult," Samuel said simply. "Some things shouldn't be owned." Mama Zuri, who'd been silent throughout, finally spoke. Her voice was soft but carried weight that made everyone lean forward to hear. "The boy is wise beyond his years," she said in her native tongue, which Samuel translated.
You, with your machines, can see inside the body in ways we never could. You can measure and test and understand the how, but we who live close to the land understand the why. Why this plant grows where it does, why treatments work better at certain times, why the forest gives us what we need if we know how to ask. She looked at each scientist in turn. Together, we could heal more than just bodies. We could heal the disconnect between your world and ours. Dr. Moss wiped her eyes roughly. I spent 15 years in medical school, and I just learned more about healing from a 12-year-old boy and a village elder than in my entire career. The collaboration began immediately. Scientists traveled to Samuel's village, not in helicopters and expensive vehicles, but on foot, the way Samuel had come. They sat with Mama Zuri under the acacia tree, learning to identify plants, understand preparation methods, and recognize patterns in illness that their instruments couldn't detect. In return, the village gained access to diagnostic tools, emergency medical training, and resources that saved lives when traditional remedies weren't enough. 3 years passed. Samuel stood in the new research center, built exactly halfway between his village and the city, a symbolic bridge between two worlds. The building itself reflected both traditions: solar panels alongside rainwater collection systems, sterile laboratories next to gardens growing medicinal plants using Mama Zuri's methods. On the main wall hung a large photograph: Mama Zuri and the 11 scientists sitting together around a mortar and pestle, learning. The image had become famous worldwide, a symbol of what was possible when pride gave way to partnership. Thomas Pemberton, now 11 years old, volunteered at the center every weekend. He'd become friends with Samuel, and together they worked on documenting plant remedies in a database designed by village elders and scientists working side by side. "Your mother's bringing another group tomorrow," Thomas said, reviewing the schedule. "Medical students from 5 different countries." Samuel nodded, adjusting the small pouch of dried herbs on his desk, the same pouch he'd carried that desperate day 3 years ago. He kept it there as a reminder that wisdom wears many faces, that knowledge lives in unexpected places, and that the greatest discoveries often come when the educated humble themselves enough to listen to those they'd dismissed. Dr. Moss had framed those words Samuel had spoken during his first lecture to her medical students. "Don't just take our knowledge and put it in your labs. Come to our villages, sit with our elders, learn why the sunset matters." The research center had saved hundreds of lives since opening, not just from the pathogen that had nearly killed Thomas, but from other illnesses where traditional and modern medicine combined proved stronger than either alone. But Samuel knew the real victory wasn't measured in lives saved or papers published. It was measured in the medical students who now spent months in rural villages before earning their degrees, in the village children who learned both plant medicine and biology, in the elders whose knowledge was finally documented, preserved, and most importantly, respected. In a world that had learned, slowly and painfully, that true wisdom recognizes no boundaries of class, credentials, or culture. Samuel's phone buzzed with a message from Tony. "Emergency. New outbreak in the eastern provinces. Symptoms don't match anything we've seen. Can you and Mama Zuri come?" Samuel looked at the pouch on his desk, then at Thomas, who'd already grabbed his bag. "Another one?" Thomas asked. "Always another one," Samuel replied.
But this time, they wouldn't face it alone. This time, they had scientists who knew how to listen, and elders who knew they'd be heard. This time, they had a chance, because the most dangerous ignorance Samuel had learned wasn't not knowing something. It was assuming you knew everything. And the dirtiest hands, the hands marked by soil and plants and honest work, often held the cleanest truths, the truths that saved lives, the truths that bridged worlds, the truths that reminded humanity wisdom has always been a conversation between the old and the new, the traditional and the modern, the forgotten and the celebrated. All it required was the courage to listen. True ignorance isn't not knowing the answer, it's assuming you already have it. Sometimes the dirtiest hands hold the cleanest truths.